Hello, and welcome to the Unsleeping Historian. Let the sounds of your world begin to fade, and allow the weight of the day to rest. There is nothing for you to do now, but to listen. We are going on a journey tonight, not to a time of grand battles or sweeping revolutions, but to the quiet, cloistered corners of the past. Our destination is the medieval world, and at its heart, the stone walls of a When we think of such a place, our modern minds often conjure an image of perfect tranquility, of peaceful, scholarly men wandering through sun-dappled cloisters, their lives a gentle rhythm of prayer and contemplation, a sanctuary from a harsh and unforgiving world. And in some ways, it was. But the peace of a medieval monastery was not the gentle, relaxing peace we seek today. It was a peace forged in iron-willed discipline, in profound austerity, and in a complete surrender of the self to a routine so demanding, so unyielding, that it would likely break the spirit of any one of us within a single day. Tonight, we will explore this hidden world. We will begin by immersing ourselves in the stark reality of a monk's daily life. From his pre-dawn waking in the bitter cold to his final prayer in the encroaching darkness. Then, we will witness the monumental clash of will between a king and his archbishop, a conflict that shook the foundations of power in England. We will then turn our gaze to the quiet miracle of the scriptorium, uncovering the lost art of the illuminated manuscript, where devotion became breathtaking beauty. And finally, we will contrast the life of the simple monk with the world of his superior, the powerful, political, and often shockingly extravagant life of a medieval abbot. It is a story of faith and power, of hardship and art, of silence and intrigue. So, close your eyes if you wish. Let your breathing slow. Our journey into the stone heart of the Middle Ages begins now. Our journey begins not on a battlefield, nor in a king's court, but in the deepest, most profound darkness of the night. It is perhaps 2 o'clock in the morning. There are no stars visible from here. Inside the long, cold room of the dormitory, there is only the thick, velvet blackness and the sound of slow, rhythmic breathing from dozens of other sleeping forms, each shrouded in a coarse, woolen habit upon a simple straw pallet. Imagine yourself there, not in your comfortable bed, but on that thin layer of straw. The cold from the stone floor seeps into your bones. It is a damp, persistent chill that is never truly absent from this place. And then, it comes. The sound cuts through the silence. It is the sacristan, the monk responsible for the bells in the church, moving through the dormitory. This is the first call. It is time for matins, the first of the 8 canonical hours, the divine office that structures every moment of every day. There is no option for leisure. There is no lingering in the warmth of your blankets. To do so would be to commit the sin of a kind of spiritual sloth, a weariness of the soul, and it is a failing that is not tolerated here. You rise, your bare feet meeting the freezing stone, and join the silent procession of dark-robed figures. You do not speak. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governs this house and thousands like it across Europe, mandates a great silence from the end of prayers last night until the first prayers of this morning. You move as a shadow amongst shadows, down the night stair that leads directly from the dormitory into the chilling expanse of the Abbey church. The only light comes from a few flickering tallow candles or oil lamps, casting long, dancing shadows up the massive stone pillars that soar into the darkness above. You can smell the cold stone, the lingering scent of beeswax and incense, and the faint, human smell of unwashed wool and sleeping bodies. You find your place in the choir stalls. The service begins. It is not a sermon. It is a series of psalms, readings from scripture, and chants, all sung from memory in Latin. The sound of the Gregorian chant fills the cavernous space. It is beautiful, ethereal, and haunting, yet it is also work. It is the opus dei, work of God, the primary reason for a monk's existence. For the next 2 hours, as the world outside remains fast asleep, your voice joins the collective, a single drop in an ocean of devotion. After matins, there is a brief pause, followed immediately by lauds, the sunrise prayer, just as the first hint of gray begins to touch the high windows of the church. When it is over, you file back up the night stair to the dormitory, but you do not sleep. You might have a short time to attend to personal needs, or perhaps to read from the few approved texts by the faint morning light. But this is not rest. It is a brief calm in the unceasing rhythm of the day. The bell will toll again for prime, the first hour of daylight. Around 6 a.m. following this service, the monks gather in the chapter house. Here the abbot assigns the day's labor. A passage from the rule of Saint Benedict is read aloud, and it is here that the community's discipline is enforced. Monks who have broken the rule by speaking when they should have been silent, by showing pride, by failing in their work must confess their sins publicly, prostrating themselves on the floor. Punishments are meted out. They might range from being given a smaller portion of food, to prostration at the church door as the other monks enter, or, for serious offenses, to corporal punishment, administered away from the public eye. It is a humbling, and often humiliating, part of the routine, designed to strip away ego and enforce absolute obedience. And then begins the second core tenet of Benedictine life: labora workera, pray and work. This is the engine of the monastic world. For many monks, especially the lay brothers or those of sturdier stock, this means manual labor in the monastery's fields. Imagine the physical reality of this. You walk out into the damp morning air, the fields shrouded in mist. Your tools are heavy, made of wood and iron. For hours, you will till the soil, sow seeds, or harvest crops. Your back bending and straining. The work is governed by the sun and the seasons. In the summer, it is grueling, hot work under a relentless sun. In the winter, it is a desperate struggle against the frozen earth, your hands raw and numb with cold. For other monks, the scholars and the scribes, labor takes place in the scriptorium. Here, the toil is of a different kind. Imagine a quiet room, often situated to catch the best natural light. You sit on a hard wooden bench, a large sheet of prepared animal skin vellum or parchment stretched before you. You work with a quill pen, carefully mixing your own ink from oak galls and iron salts. The work is silent, meticulous, and agonizingly slow. You copy sacred texts, letter by letter, for hours on end. Your eyes strain in the dim light, your fingers cramp, and your back aches from leaning over the slanted desk. A single mistake could ruin a priceless page, a week's worth of work. This division of the day continues, punctuated by the tolling of the bell. At the third hour, around 9 a.m., the bell calls you from your work for the service of terce. Then you return to your labor. At the sixth hour, high noon, it is time for sext, followed by the main meal of the day. You file into the refectory, the dining hall. Silence is absolute here. As you eat, one monk stands at a lectern reading aloud from the lives of the saints or from scripture. The meal itself is a lesson in hospitality. For much of the year, meat is forbidden. The staple is a thick vegetable stew, or pottage, along with a large portion of coarse, dark bread. To drink, there is small ale or watered-down wine. You eat what you are given, quickly and silently. Your focus meant to be on the sacred words being read, not on the sustenance before you. After the meal, there is a brief period for rest or reading, and then it is back to work. The bell tolls again for none. At the 9th hour, around 3 p.m., you then continue your labor until the light begins to fail. As dusk approaches, the workday is finally over. The bell calls you to Vespers, the evening prayer service. This is often a more solemn, contemplative service as the day draws to a close. Following Vespers, there might be a small evening meal, often just leftovers from midday, before the final gathering of the day. Complan. This is the last service, held as complete darkness falls. The prayers are for protection through the night. It is a quiet, intimate end to the day. After the final amen, the great silence begins again. The abbot might sprinkle the monks with holy water as they file out, and you return to the dormitory. The door is locked. You find your simple pallet, lie down in your habit, and surrender to sleep, because you know, with absolute certainty, that in just a few short hours, in the deepest part of the night, the sacristan's bell will ring again. This was the rhythm of their lives, a constant, unyielding cycle of prayer and work, of silence and submission. It was a life stripped of personal choice, of comfort, of ego. The goal was not happiness as we understand it, but the purification of the soul through the subjugation of the body and the will. It was an existence of profound purpose, but one that required a fortitude, a complete surrender, that is almost impossible for us to imagine. To exist within those walls was to be a single, humble note in a vast, centuries-long chant, offered up to God. And for the men who lived it, that was everything. The life of the monk was a universe unto itself, governed by the rule of Saint Benedict and the tolling of the bell. But even the thickest stone walls could not entirely shut out the world beyond. Monasteries were powerful landowners, centers of learning, and key pieces on the great, complex chessboard of medieval politics. And the rules of the church did not always align with the laws of the crown. Let us now draw our focus away from the inner life of the cloister and turn to the world of power, ambition, and a friendship that would curdle into a bitter, and ultimately fatal, rivalry. This is the story of a king who sought absolute control, and an archbishop who would die to deny it to him. It is the story of Henry II of England and Thomas Becket. Imagine England in the middle of the 12th century, a young, dynamic, and fiercely intelligent king. Henry II has ascended to the throne. He has inherited a kingdom fractured by civil war, a land where powerful barons have grown accustomed to lawlessness. Henry's great ambition is to restore order, to bring the entire realm under the firm, centralized authority of the king's law. And at his right hand is his most trusted advisor, his chancellor, Thomas Becket. In these early years, they were the closest of allies, and by all accounts, dear friends. Becket was not a pious, otherworldly cleric. He was a man of the world, charming, efficient, intelligent, and deeply loyal to his king. He lived a life of luxury and influence, managing the kingdom's finances and diplomacy with dazzling skill. They hunted together, feasted together, and worked in seamless partnership to consolidate the king's power. Henry trusted him completely. So, in the year 1161, when the Archbishop of Canterbury, the most powerful religious figure in England, died, Henry believed he had a perfect solution. He would make his friend, his loyal Chancellor Thomas, the new Archbishop. From the king's perspective, it was a masterful political move. Who better to bring the church to heel than his own man? A man who understood the needs of the state and had proven his loyalty time and time again. With Thomas as Archbishop, the church would effectively become another department of the royal government. The final piece of Henry's orderly kingdom would fall into place. It was the greatest miscalculation of Henry's reign. Something profound shifted in Thomas Becket upon becoming Archbishop of Canterbury. Perhaps the weight of the sacred office truly descended upon him. Perhaps his ambition simply found a new, higher calling. Whatever the reason, the transformation was absolute. The worldly chancellor vanished. In his place stood a figure of intense, unbending piety. He resigned the chancellorship against the king's wishes. He adopted an austere lifestyle, famously wearing a Silesia rough animal hair shirt beneath his magnificent archbishop's robes, his constant irritation a private penance. He was no longer the king's man. He was, in his own mind and actions, God's man. The friendship that had defined their lives quickly fractured, and the central point of conflict was a question of law. The issue was that of criminous clerks. In England at the time, any member of the clergy, even those in minor orders, who committed a crime, be assault, or even murder, could only be tried in a Christian court. These ecclesiastical courts were notoriously lenient, often prescribing punishments of prayer, pilgrimage, or defrocking, rather than the prison, mutilation, or execution favored by the king's royal courts. For Henry, this was an intolerable affront to his authority. He saw it as a loophole that allowed criminals to escape true justice simply by hiding behind the shield of the church. He drafted a set of 16 articles, known as the Constitutions of designed to assert the supremacy of royal law over all subjects in England, clergy included. Becket refused. He saw this as a direct attack on the liberties of the church, an attempt by a secular ruler to usurp the authority of God's own courts. The two men, once inseparable friends, now stood on opposite sides of an unbridgeable chasm, one representing the power of the state, the other the power of the church. The king's fury grew. Becket was hounded, accused of corruption from his time as chancellor. Fearing for his life, he fled England in the dead of night, beginning a 6-year exile in France. From there, he petitioned the Pope, wrote letters, and engaged in a long-distance war of wills with the king he once served. Henry, for his part, grew ever more frustrated. The orderly kingdom he craved was being thwarted by the stubbornness of one man, the very man he had raised to power. Finally, in 1170, a fragile truce was brokered, and Becket agreed to return to England. But the spirit of compromise was gone. Before he had even landed, he excommunicated the bishops who had sided with the king in his absence, an act of supreme defiance. When news of this reached Henry in his court in Normandy, he fell into one of the towering rages for which he was famous. He railed against the man who had been the source of his troubles for so long, and in this moment of white-hot frustration, he is said to have uttered the infamous, fateful words. The exact phrasing is lost to history, but the sentiment echoes down the centuries. What miserable drones and traitors have I nourished and promoted in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born clerk? Or, as it is more popularly remembered, will no one rid me of this turbulent priest? It was not, perhaps, a direct order, but but it was heard by those who were eager to win the king's favor. 4 knights, interpreting the king's rage as a royal command, slipped away from the court, took a ship across the channel, and rowed hard for Canterbury. They arrived at Canterbury Cathedral in the late afternoon of December 29, 1170. The monks were in the choir, chanting Vespers, their voices filling the sacred space. Just as we imagined in our monk's day, the rhythm of the Opus Dei was proceeding as it always did. The 4 knights, fully armed, burst into the cathedral. The clang of their armor and swords on the stone floor was a shocking intrusion, a sound of violence in a house of peace. The terrified monks scattered, urging Becket to flee, to hide in the crypts or bolt the doors. He refused. The church must not be made into a castle, he said. He stood near a pillar by the altar steps, a defiant figure in his sacred vest. The knights confronted him, shouting, demanding he absolve the bishops he had He would not. They tried to drag him from the church, to avoid committing murder on holy ground, but he resisted. In the ensuing chaos, in the dim, flickering candlelight of the holy sanctuary, the first blow glanced off his head. A second followed, and a third. Becket fell to his knees on the pavement, his final words a prayer of self-commendation to God. A final blow was struck, and then there was silence, broken only by the horrified gasps of the few monks who had witnessed the act. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the most powerful cleric in England, lay dead before his own altar. His life and his blood now stained the sacred floor of his own cathedral. The sacrilege was so profound it sent a shockwave across all of Christendom. This was not a death on a battlefield. It was a murder in the very heart of God's sanctuary. King Henry was reportedly devastated when he heard the news, locking himself away for days, refusing to eat. Whether his grief was for his old friend or for the catastrophic political fallout, we cannot know. The consequences were swift. Becket was almost immediately declared a martyr and a saint. Miracles were reported at his tomb. Canterbury became one of the most important pilgrimage sites in all of Europe. The king was forced to perform a dramatic public walking barefoot through the streets of Canterbury, while being symbolically flogged by the local monks. Ultimately, he had to renounce the constitutions of Clarendon and concede to the church the very liberties he had fought so hard to extinguish. In the end, the king lost. By dying on the cathedral floor, Thomas Becket secured a victory that had eluded him in life. The clash between church and state would continue for centuries, but the story of the turbulent priest and the furious king served as a stark, bloody lesson in the limits of earthly power. While kings and archbishops clashed, shaking the very foundations of kingdoms with their worldly struggles, another kind of work was being done, a quieter, slower, and perhaps more enduring work. It was happening in the silent rooms we have already visited, the scriptoriums of the great abbeys and monasteries. Here, the clamor of politics faded, replaced by the soft scratch of a quill on parchment, and the patient whisper of a brush applying color. The murder of an archbishop was a singular, violent event that echoed through history, but the work of the scriptorium was a quiet, daily miracle, repeated for centuries. Let us now turn our gaze to this forgotten craft, to the lost world of the illuminated manuscript, where a book was not merely a text, but a sacred object. A vessel of breathtaking beauty created through immense labor and devotion. Imagine, once again, that you are inside the monastery walls, but this time, you are not focused on prayer you are in the scriptorium. It is a long, narrow room, positioned carefully to catch the morning light. The air is still and cool, thick with a faint, pleasant sense of melting beeswax, of old wood, of ink, and of the animal skins that will become the pages of a book. The only sound is the rustle of a turning page, or the dip of a pen. This is a workshop for the soul. The creation of a single illuminated page was a journey in itself, involving many hands and painstaking processes. It began not with a pen, but with an animal. The canvas for this art was parchment, or vellum, made from the treated skins of calves, sheep, or goats. The process was arduous. A parchmenter would first soak the skin in a bath of lime and water for days, loosening the hair and fat. Then, it was draped over a wooden frame, pulled taut like a drum. The real work began here, with a special curved knife called a loop. With rhythmic, careful strokes, the monk would scrape the surface of the skin, removing every last trace of hair and flesh. The skin was scraped, wetted, and allowed to dry under tension, over and over again. Finally, its surface was dusted with chalk or pumice powder, and rubbed 4 hours, until it was transformed into a smooth, pale, almost velvety sheet, a material both durable enough to last 1,000 years, and delicate enough to hold the most intricate art. Once the page was prepared, it was handed to the scribe. Before a single word could be written, the page had to be ruled. Using a pointed tool made of lead or silver, the scribe would mark a faint, precise grid of lines and margins. These lines were almost invisible on the finished page, but they ensured that every line of text was perfectly straight, every column perfectly aligned. It was the hidden architecture of perfection. Then came the writing. The scribe would work with a quill, most often from a goose or swan feather, carefully sharpened to a fine point. The ink was made by hand, following ancient recipes. Oak galls, the small, hard growths on oak trees, were crushed and mixed with iron salts, and a binder like gum arabic. This created a deep, brownish-black ink that would chemically bond with the parchment, becoming part of the page itself. Slowly, patiently, the scribe would begin his work. Letter by letter, he would copy the sacred text. His hand had to be impossibly steady. The script, perhaps a clear Carolingian minuscule or a dense, angular Gothic textura, had to be uniform throughout. This was not an act of creative writing. It was an act of perfect, devotional replication. It was prayer made visible. After the scribe's work was done, the plain text was passed to the most specialized artist of all, and it is here that the page would begin to blossom into life. First, the illuminator would sketch the designs in faint outline. Then, he would prepare for the most magical element, the gold. He would apply a base layer of either gesso or plaster-like substance or glare, a sticky fluid made from egg whites, in the areas destined to shine. After letting it dry, he would perform a delicate operation. He would take a sheet of gold leaf, a piece of metal beaten so impossibly thin that it would disintegrate at a touch, and could be moved by a breath. The illuminator would breathe gently on the gesso base, making its surface momentarily tacky, and then, with an artist's precision, lay the gold leaf down. Using a burnisher tool with a smooth, polished tip of agate, or even a wolf's tooth, he would gently rub the gold, and as he rubbed, a miracle would occur. The dull, fragile leaf would transform into a solid, brilliant surface, gleaming with a light that seemed to emanate from within the page itself. In the dim candlelight of a church or library, this gold would catch the flame and shimmer, as if the word of God was literally illuminated. Then came the color. The illuminator's pigments were a collection of precious substances, ground by hand on a stone slab and mixed with egg tempera to bind them to the page. Each color had its own story. The most prized was ultramarine blue, a deep, vibrant hue made from grinding the semi-precious stone lapis lazuli, which had to be carried over land and sea from the mountains of Afghanistan. It was often more expansive than the gold it sat beside. Reds came from the mineral cinnabar, or from the crushed bodies of tiny Kermes insects. Greens were ground from malachite. Yellows could be made from the vibrant but toxic mineral orpiment, or the more gentle saffron flower. Each pigment was a jewel, carefully applied with a fine-tipped brush made of fur from a squirrel or stoat. The illuminator would fill in the designs, intricate vine-like borders that snaked around the text, playful scenes and creatures, called marginalia, that tumbled in the margins, and the glorious historiated initials, massive capital letters at the beginning of a chapter that contained an entire, detailed biblical scene within their shape. A single page could take weeks to complete. A full book, like the famous Book of Kells or the Lindisfarne Gospels, was the work of years, perhaps even a lifetime. It was an object of immense financial and spiritual value. To open such a book was to encounter not just a story, but a total work of art, where every element, from the feel of the parchment to the shine of the gold to the shape of the letters, was designed to inspire awe and draw the mind closer to God. This was a world built on patience, a world where time was measured not in hours, but in the slow, steady completion of a perfect page. In our modern age of fleeting digital text and instant information, it is a world that feels impossibly distant. But in the quiet scriptoriums of medieval Europe, these anonymous artists created works of silent, shimmering beauty that have far outlasted the noisy reigns of the kings and politicians of their day. We have witnessed the austere, disciplined life of the common monk. We have seen the clash of spiritual and earthly power in the world outside the cloister, and we have marveled at the quiet, devotional beauty created in the scriptorium. We have built an image of the monastery as a place of submission, silence, and humble, anonymous work. But this is not the complete picture. Within the very same monastery walls that housed the shivering novice and the painstaking illuminator, there often exists in a life of such power, privilege, and even luxury, that it stood in stark contrast to the ideals of poverty and obedience that the institution was built upon. We now turn our attention to the master of this domain. To be the abbot of a major medieval monastery was not simply to be a spiritual leader. It was to be a prince of the church, a feudal lord, a CEO, and a major political figure, all in one. A great abbey like Cluny in France or St. Albans in England was a colossal landowner, controlling vast tracts of farmland, entire villages, profitable mills, and bustling markets. The abbot was the manager of this immense portfolio. He commanded a hierarchy not only of his monks, but of lay brothers, servants, tenants, and knights. He was a man who negotiated with kings and corresponded with popes, and his lifestyle reflected this immense status. Let us draw a comparison, a quiet contrast between the life of the simple monk we met in our first segment, and the daily reality of the man who was his absolute superior. The monk, as we know, slept on a straw pallet in a large, cold, communal dormitory, rising in the pre-dawn chill. The abbot, however, resided in his own private lodging. This was often a substantial stone house, separate from the main monastic buildings. Imagine stepping inside, where the dormitory was drafty and bare. The abbot's house was warm. Rich tapestries, depicting hunts or biblical scenes, covered the stone walls, trapping the heat and muffling the sound. A great fireplace would crackle in the main hall, its light dancing on polished wood furniture, and his bed would not be a simple pallet, but a large curtained four-poster, piled high with feather mattresses and fur-lined blankets. When the bell called the monk to the refectory for his silent meager meal, the abbot's day was different. While many abbots did eat with their monks on occasion to maintain a spirit of community, the rule of Saint Benedict provided a crucial exception. An abbot must entertain guests to offer Christian hospitality. This duty was often interpreted very broadly. The abbot had his own kitchen, his own staff, and his own grand dining hall. Here, the rule of silence was replaced by the sound of conversation, music, and political negotiation. The austere diet of pottage and bread was replaced by lavish banquets designed to impress visiting nobles, bishops, or royal officials. Imagine the scene. A long table set with fine linen and silver. The food that arrived was a testament to the abbey's wealth. While his monks were forbidden from eating the flesh of four-legged animals, the abbot's table might feature roasted venison, boar, or even a showpiece like a roasted swan or peacock, its feathers reattached for presentation. There were pies filled with spiced meats, fish swimming in expensive sauces, and desserts sweetened with rare and costly sugar. The watered-down ale of the refectory was replaced by fine wines imported from France. And what of labora? The monk toiled in the fields or the scriptorium. The abbot's work was the work of power. His days were filled with meetings, with his cellarer to discuss the monastery's finances, with his bailiffs to manage the estates, with petitioners seeking justice or favor. He would preside over the abbey's courts and dictate correspondence that would influence affairs of state. When he traveled, he was not on foot, but at the head of a great retinue, riding a fine horse, with servants to carry his baggage and guards for his protection. This is not to say that all abbots were corrupt or hypocritical. Many were deeply pious men who struggled to balance the immense worldly power of their office with their personal vows of poverty. But the temptation was immense, and the system itself demanded a certain level of grandeur. To maintain the abbey's influence and protect its interests in the cutthroat world of medieval politics, the abbot needed to project power. His lavishness was, in a sense, a shield for the institution he led. But the contrast remains, and it is at the heart of understanding the complex reality of this lost world. Imagine the end of the day. The simple monk, weary from a day of physical labor and hours of prayer, lies down on his straw pallet in the cold and the dark. He prays for the well-being of his community and for the soul of his abbot. And at that same moment, just a few hundred yards away, that abbot might be concluding a rich meal with a glass of spiced wine, warming his feet by a private fire, his mind occupied not with the divine office, but with a border dispute with a neighboring baron or a request for funds from the king. They lived under the same rule, within the same walls, dedicated to the same God, but they were, in almost every conceivable way, living in two different worlds. And so, our journey through the medieval monastery comes to a close. We have walked in the footsteps of the novice, awakened by the bell in the chilling darkness. We have felt the unyielding rhythm of his day, a day of prayer and labor, of silence and submission. We have witnessed the grand, violent clash of wills between a king and his archbishop, a struggle that reminds us that no wall is high enough to keep the world at bay. We have bent close in the quiet of the scriptorium to watch the miracle of golden color bloom on a page of parchment, a testament to a world of profound patience and devotion. And finally, we have sat at the abbot's table and understood that even in a house of God, the hierarchies and luxuries of the world found a comfortable home. The medieval monastery was not the simple, peaceful sanctuary we often imagine. It was a complex, self-contained world, full of contradictions. It was a place of both profound faith and political ambition, of extreme austerity and startling luxury, humble work and the ostentatious display of power. It was a microcosm of the medieval world itself. And now, our journey is over. The sounds of that distant time can fade. The cold stone, the tolling bell, the scratching quill. Let them all recede. Become aware, once more, of the quiet and the comfort of your own, of the softness of your bed, the warmth of your room, the gentle, easy peace of a world free from the iron rule of the bell. There is nothing more to see, nothing more to learn. All that is left to do is rest, to drift, and to sleep.